and we're going to get started. So welcome to today's session, which is our 40th IEP Live Learn Lunch. We're really excited to bring you this one. It's Nesta, and they're going to be looking at mapping career pathways with us today, or career causeways, sorry, excuse me. And before we do get started and I hand you over, I just as usual want to make you aware of a couple more Live Learn Lunches we've got coming up over the next couple of weeks. Next week, we've got White Calm joining us with a personal trainer, Nick, who is going to be talking to us about how we can make sure we stay fit and healthy within our offices and within our workspaces, especially for those of us who aren't working from home at the moment. So that's one not to be missed. I think he's going to train us live, so make sure you're wearing comfortable clothes like me next week. And then the week after, we've got Dr. Jo Ingold and Teresa Scott, two of our fellows who have been working on sector collaboration. They've done some research within the sector and gathered evidence from other sectors to look at how we can improve our performance by borrowing some ideas around collaboration from other areas. So make sure you enroll for that one if you haven't already. But that's not what you're here for today. I have got you on mute, but there will be opportunities later to join in, and we will be asking you to get involved. So use the chat, make sure you're talking to each other. We've got Jenna, Carlis and Kath here to present today, and they will be managing the chat as well, so some waves there. So do get your thoughts and comments in the chat and enjoy today's session. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over. So thank you very much, and over to you guys.
Thanks so much, Helen. Thanks for having us today. Really happy to be here. The fitness session sounds really fun. I'm upset that I'm not a member of the IEP and I can't join that one. But hopefully today's just as fun. So again, thanks for joining us, and we're going to be speaking to you about our project called Mapping Career Causeways. I'm just going to run through a couple of quick housekeeping things before I hand over to Kath to introduce our team and Nesta a bit more, and then Carlos, who's going to run us through the main content. But as Helen said, so everyone's on mute, although there'll be lots of, or kind of two main points during the presentation today, where we really want to hear your thoughts and your feedback. So we do really encourage you to sort of get involved, write comments and questions in the chat, and then whenever there's time for discussion, please do take yourself off mute and get involved. So the agenda for today is I'll quickly do this with an introduction, and then I'm going to hand over to Kath, who's going to introduce Nesta and then specifically talk about the Open Jobs Data team and Nesta that we're all from, so that we can share a bit more about what we do in our sort of core mission. And then Carlos is going to walk us through this project specifically, which is the Mapping Career Causeways project. And then at the end, we'll have time for discussion, feedback, and any final questions. And just to give a quick overview, so the key aim of this project is to identify how workers who are at risk due to automation can build on the skills that they have to transition into jobs which are safer from the risk of automation. And specifically for this workshop, what we would like to do is to learn from you how you think these insights could be applied to help workers and the people that you work with and support to secure more better career opportunities and provision opportunities, to gather any feedback that you have about how it might be used, who might find it the most useful, how we might test it, and what might be missing. And also generally to just hear about your work and any ways that you think you might be able to incorporate this tool. So I'm now going to hand over to Kath, who will introduce our team a bit more.
Thanks so much, Jenna. Welcome everybody. Thanks so much for coming along and joining us today. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thanks. So I'm Kath Sleeman, and I'm helping to lead our Open Jobs Data team here at Nesta. Just in case you haven't heard of Nesta before, we're an independent foundation or charity, and our aim is to promote innovation, which is really just kind of to promote and help spark, great ideas and ideas that can help tackle some of the biggest challenges facing society, from automation to climate change and the like. So in Nesta we have a team of data scientists. There are about 15 or 20 of us now. And we look at how we can use novel sources of data to kind of tackle some of those big issues that I just mentioned. By novel sources of data, so I mean probably not your kind of standard survey data, so data that was collected for another purpose and we're kind of recycling or upcycling it to see whether we can use that data to kind of tackle these big challenges. Within the data science team, there's a group of us who focus on improving labour market information, and we're called the Open Jobs Data Team. And the reason that we're in this space is that we think there's a lot of missing labour market information. And so we know that workers can find it difficult to know what skills that they already have. We know that employers also find it difficult to know whether someone employing from a different industry is skilled, for the position that's open. And we know that policymakers can find it difficult to have that bird's eye view of kind of who is in kind of greatest need of assistance and help with their kind of labour market journey. And then, of course, that kind of uncertainty is compounded at the moment by not just, the awful impact of COVID, but also some long, kind of slower moving sources of disruption, like automation and climate change in our ageing population. So we just think that we might be able to kind of broaden the range of information that's available to workers and employers and policymakers. But we recognise that it's not going to be, data alone, what's the phrase, that it can help, but it's often never the entire solution. But we think, it may just help a little bit. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thanks. So our starting point is that there is this missing information in the labour market that might be helpful and kind of would be helpful to workers and policymakers and employers. So just to give a few examples of that missing information, in the UK, we still don't have a national skills taxonomy. That would be like a kind of just a way of kind of talking about skills using a common language, which would be really helpful. We lack information, kind of timely information on emerging skills and skills that are becoming redundant. We don't have formal definitions of kind of green skills and green jobs, and really nuanced definitions that account for kind of the greenness of your occupation and your industry. And finally, most importantly, and what we're going to talk about today, is that we don't have a formal system for recommending job transitions and skills. So if someone is looking to move from job A to job B, we don't have a kind of a recognised national system of saying, well, here are the skills that you'll need, and here are the skills that you probably already have in that job. That just doesn't exist at the moment. Move on. This is just one example of another project that we've done in this space that I thought you might be interested in. It's a data-driven skills taxonomy. So what that means is that we took 40 million job adverts, we extracted the skills mentioned in those job adverts, and then we clustered those skills to create this taxonomy of skills. And the reason you'd want to do this, if you like, is not only to try and build that common language, but by building the taxonomy from job adverts, it can give you a sense of the demand for different skills and how that's changing over time. And it can give you a sense of the value of different skills, because we can use the salaries that are mentioned within job adverts, and we can look at what skills tend to be mentioned alongside those salaries. And so we get a sense of what skills are paid more than others. We're going to revise our taxonomy next year, and we're going to publish the next version towards the end of August. And that will be open for anyone to use if they wish to. So today, though, we're going to talk about Mapping Career Causeways. So this was a project that's funded by JP Morgan, Chase & Co, and we're actually publishing it tomorrow. So it's very, very timely. And this is all about measuring the similarities between occupations to try and create that map that I talked about, that kind of map of the labour market, in which we can do, which we really hope will achieve kind of three things. So first, we want to be able to help broaden people's career horizons. So if they're thinking of moving jobs, perhaps we can show them some other options where their skills are relevant and could be transferred into, but perhaps they just haven't considered. The second thing we think it can do is it can help in terms of personalising upskilling or retraining. So if a person is in occupation A and they want to move into occupation B, we can identify some of the skills that we think they may need to acquire to make that transition successful. And the third thing that we can do is to look at the impact of shocks. So we can overlay on top of this map the risk of automation, and we can show kind of which groups are likely to be really impacted by automation and might need a bit of extra help to transition into a lower risk role. that's just a very brief overview, but just the final slide is just who's in the team, I think. Yeah, so this was such a group effort because we're very aware as data scientists that data is never the whole solution, and we really want to ensure that what we do can be used by others. And so there's a large emphasis in this project on identifying the best way in which to communicate our insights to others. How would you like to receive the information? And also then getting feedback from you on how we can improve our model and algorithm so that the kind of insights are more useful as well. So that's why we have such a mix of kind of skills within the team. And yeah, like I say, it's been a real group effort. So I'll leave it there and I'll hand over to Carlos, who's going to explain a little bit more about the project. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Kath. Hello, everyone. I'm Carlos. I'm one of the data scientists in Open Jobs data team. And I'm really happy to be here today and to talk to all of you. So before I kind of delve more deeper in the project, I thought it's also useful to just revisit this analogy of causeways. And so a causeway, as you probably know, is a raised pathway or road like the one that is shown here in this picture. And it is, this pathway allows you to cross a stretch of water to reach dry land. And so when we think about automation, to us, it's a bit like a rising tide. And as it rises, it's changing the landscape of jobs and causing maybe some jobs even to disappear. And so what we need to do is to identify, and if necessary, also build these causeways along which people can transition to more secure jobs. And so the overarching goal of this project is to our hope is to provide practical, actionable recommendations for lowering workers' exposure to automation risk. And the emphasis really is on practical. And that's why I'm really excited to present this work today to you, employability professionals, which I think is probably the most important audience for this work. So at the beginning, I will give you a very broad overview of the different main parts of this project, and then we will go a bit more deeper in detail. So the project had three main parts. And the first one was to measure the susceptibility of European jobs to automation. So to do so, we translated task automation scores, which were developed by researchers, Brynjolfsson and Mitchell and Rock, in a study back in 2018. Where they sort of used a occupational framework from US called ONIT, which details thousands of different tasks that are specified to approximately 1,000 different occupations. And they estimated the suitability of these tasks to machine learning algorithms. And we took these results and we translated them to the European context by using the European Skills, Occupations and Qualifications framework called ESCO. And to do so, we had to develop sort of a crosswalk between these two frameworks, which is also quite useful because now it's also possible to integrate other research insights or sort of other rich information that's present in the ONIT framework to the European context. And we also developed a new measure to kind of identify tasks that might be particularly difficult for automation. And so these are kind of what we call bottleneck tasks that may protect workers from being automated away. Then the second part of the project aimed to shift the focus from the occupations to the actual workers who might be at risk of automation. And so we described the workers in the UK, France, and Italy using the European Union Labor Force Survey. We also wanted to access sort of the data about workers in Germany, but unfortunately we had issues accessing the data. But that's because Germans are very protective about their data. And then crucially, the final step was to identify the viable and desirable transitions from at-risk occupations to more secure employment. And so here we used a framework that has been developed by organizations like the OECD and also World Economic Forum, where they talk about viable transitions, which are transitions that would require minimal reskilling, so that the jobs have high similarity of skills and other work characteristics. And then there's also the other concept of desirable transition. And here we use the definition that a desirable transition is one where you kind of have a comparable salary. But we also recognize that there probably are also many other considerations that eventually should be taken into account if we talk about desirability. And so by joining up the ONIT and ESCO frameworks, we could assess job transitions at quite an unprecedented granularity for over 1,600 occupations. And then we also developed methods using machine learning, like natural language processing, to evaluate the skills gaps and identify upskilling opportunities. And so taken together, the main theme of this work has been to provide a fully open and granular, nuanced methodologies and insights. So we will publish a report, hopefully tomorrow, if everything goes well, but detailing all this in much sort of granular detail. But today I will kind of give you a brief overview of the methodology and the key insights. But to emphasize our aim for our findings to be of practical use, I would like to start with a concrete example for recommending job transitions. And we will also keep this presentation as interactive as possible, as we also really want to hear from you. And so there will be also opportunities for you to discuss this work. So I would like now for you to play out the scenario where you need to recommend a job transition for a worker who is presently at high risk of automation. And in this process, you will receive help from our transition recommendation algorithm. So our worker is Alex, who is a hotel concierge who's earning around £19,000 a year. And what we have found out is that Alex, in fact, has, so the hotel concierge occupation, in fact, has the highest average task automation score across all occupations. And Alex is also one among the almost 900,000 client information workers in the UK. And so this is kind of like a representative occupation. On the right-hand side, you can see the types of data that we use for recommending similar jobs for Alex. So you can see on the right-hand side, we have skills, which are taken from the European skills framework. You can see things like identify customers' needs or greet guests. And then these skills are also grouped into categories, which roughly correspond to different types of work activities. So you can see things like obtaining information verbally or negotiating. And then in addition, we also added data from the American framework, which kind of describes the occupation in a broader way and describes more the structural, physical, and interpersonal aspects of the work, which we call the work context. And these tell you kind of, for example, how much you need to use telephone or do face-to-face discussions, also how high might be the time pressure, or how much freedom you might have to make decisions. This occupation is also just a compelling example in the context of automation, because the job has components that are both related to social interactions, but also to purely delivering and processing information. And we have already seen several real-life examples of automation that have approached one or both of these aspects. An interesting example back from 2016 was a concierge robot named Connie, which was deployed by IBM in a Hilton hotel. But I think what we are all kind of more familiar with, and also maybe more comfortable with, are examples like the check-in machines, or also concierge apps. And importantly, adoption of such solutions will only accelerate in the present context of the coronavirus pandemic. And so our algorithm identified quite a few transition opportunities for the hotel concierge that are viable in terms of the job similarity, and also desirable in terms of salary. But for the purposes of this presentation, I have selected these 3 jobs, and we want now to ask you to choose which one would you recommend to Alex. So Jenna will start a poll, and I invite you to make your vote, to give us your vote. So the 3 occupations are, the first one is tourist information officer, the second one is customer experience manager, and the third one is social security officer, which you might also know as civil servants, basically, that advise clients on benefits, employment, and such things. And so I see that there are some votes coming in. And at the moment, we have about 20% voting for tourist information officer, which provides information and advice to travelers about local attractions, events. So quite a related job. It's hotel concierge. And then we have 50% voting for customer experience manager, which is also, in a related sort of area of work, but there's also some sort of, you can see additional sort of tasks related to developing plans of action and ensuring customer satisfaction, boosting company profits. And then we also have 25% voting for social security officer. Okay, thank you very much for voting. That's very interesting. So now in the next few slides, we will go through kind of the different trade-offs that our data can kind of inform you about these different transitions. And then you'll be interested, and then we'll revisit kind of whether your preference has changed. So, and also please feel free to leave comments in the chat if you have. So the first transition that we presented was tourist information officer. And so let's dive in how our framework can kind of, what can it tell you about this transition? So the salary is similar, and also the job similarity is quite high. So you can see the job similarity is about 43%. And what kind of we can do is also to evaluate what is kind of we can calibrate our expectations for what is a typical job similarity for a highly viable transition. And we actually find that about 40% or higher is actually what we call a highly viable job transition. And then what we see is also that there is quite a good overlap of skills related to interaction with customers. But critically, the tourist information officers have also high exposure to automation risks. And this is something of a general observation that we found, was that similar occupations are likely to have a similar risk of automation. And hence, if at-risk workers are simply looking for the most feasible job transitions, they may end up in jobs that are also high risk. And so this is kind of underscores the importance of including this kind of information in the decision making. The second option that I presented was a customer experience manager, which has a substantially higher salary and also a similarly strong emphasis on activities and skills related to communication, such as to maintain customer service or manage customer experience. But this job still involves more management skills and activities, such as developing objectives and strategies to improve business processes or plan medium to long-term objectives, and develop strategies for improvement and accessibility. And there's also stronger emphasis on what we call information skills, such as to measure customer feedback or to analyze business objectives and data about clients. And all these skills we can, so these are kind of information we can get from the European skills framework. And importantly, this occupation is also at a lower risk of automation. And so this is a better transition option for the longer term, even if it involves kind of more reskilling or upskilling. And then the third option was social security officer, which also has a higher salary, and the job similarity is still within the range that we call the transition viable. And importantly, again, the automation risk is also lower. But we also see that there's still kind of a similarity in terms of the general type of work activities that are related to communication, assisting and providing information and support. There is a poorer match of specific skills and knowledge, particularly knowledge in social security law or government social security programs. And interestingly, also, this occupation has 11 other transitions to occupations in a lower risk category. So this might be a potential pathway that opens up more doors for future career pathways. So now that I have kind of outlined a few trade-offs between these occupations, we can actually run another poll, which is asking you the same question. And it's just interesting to see if any of this additional information kind of changed your opinion about which occupations would you recommend to Alex. So we see that there is slightly less support for tourist information officer. So now we have about 8% or 1 vote for tourist information officer. So this is kind of what we expect. and at the same time, also, of course, we have to acknowledge that the adoption of automation will not happen, uniformly across the whole country in all places. And so it might still be a reasonable sort of short-term option for job transition. But in general, I'm happy to see that the support for this one has reduced, while we now have 65% votes for customer experience manager, which is kind of the occupation with the highest salary, and 22% for social security officer. All right, so thank you very much for your votes, and please again feel free to leave more comments in the chat. We'll try to respond to those. And I will now continue to tell you a little bit more about how do we actually know this information. So how do we know the automation risk? And also how did we arrive at these transition recommendations? So we measured 2 aspects of job suitability for machine learning. As I mentioned in the beginning, so we used task automation scores that were developed by Brynjolfsson, Mitchell, and Rock in 2018, where they evaluate 18,000 tasks. And then we translated these results to the European occupations by developing a novel crosswalk between the 2 different occupational frameworks. And then we derived 2 sets of automation risk estimates for over 1,600 occupations. And the first set refers to the overall automation risk. So in line with the original study, it is measured simply as the average of automation scores across all the job tasks. And we also weight them by the task importance. And this is also given by the occupational framework. And then we also produced a new measure of automation risk, which is more related to the existence of the so-called bottleneck tasks. And just some examples of such features, of such bottleneck features are, for example, low tolerance to errors, such as tasks to inspect structures or equipment, or tasks of medical nature, or also if the task requires dexterity or physical labor, such as unloading cargo from cars. And so it is important to note that these estimates, while being very granular, they don't take into account advances in robotics, but we can use them to also estimate what would happen if there would be like a huge leap in the kind of capabilities of robots. And so just to give you an example, so here on the on the horizontal axis, we have the automation risk, and on the vertical axis, we have the prevalence of bottleneck tasks. And you can see that we have highlighted a group of occupations in red, which we call high risk occupations, which have high automation risk and low prevalence of bottleneck tasks. You can see examples here: our hotel concierge, as well as medical transcriptionist or investment clerk. And generally, these high risk occupations typically include jobs from sales and services, also clerical business administration roles, and also financial associate professional jobs. And then the next essential step is also to find transitions away from automation. So we did this in 5 steps. In the first one, we built detailed occupational profiles. So we used this ESCO and ONIT framework, which allowed us to use 13,000 ESCO skills and also include work context features and education experience information from ONIT. And then we compared these different occupations using data science and machine learning methods. And importantly, we use natural language processing to do sort of a flexible comparison of the different skill sets. And then we identified viable transitions by looking at the fit of skills, work activities, work context, and education and experience. And then we also identified desirable transitions, so by looking at the salary information. And then finally, of course, we had to also restrict the transitions so that we don't recommend transitioning to occupations that are still at risk of automation. So we only allowed occupations where the automation risk is lower. And so with this, we can actually evaluate pathways for almost 3,000 occupations that are listed in ESCO, but we analyzed in detail 1,600 for which we had the automation risk estimates. And so here, for example, for the hotel concierge, you can see on the list on the right all the occupations that our algorithm deemed as being safe and viable and desirable transitions. And what is good is also that we can rank them such that on the top of the list, you have occupations that are more similar in terms of specific skills. So you can see here occupations such as doorman or hotel porter or club host, or also a customer experience manager. And then at the other end, so at the bottom of the list, we have occupations that are more similar in a broader sense in terms of the general types of work activities. And here you can find our social security officer, as well as other perhaps more exotic recommendations, like, for example, private detective. But yeah, so this is kind of in a nutshell how the algorithm works. And of course, we are well aware that we do not account for all the potential barriers to worker mobility. And these recommendations from this algorithm is just the first step to appreciate the range of workers' career transition possibilities. And probably, as you know much better than us, that in reality, workers face various additional challenges and barriers to switching jobs. And each worker will have their own unique set of skills and preferences. And some pathways may have formal qualification requirements, which will be quite region-specific information. And so at the moment, we are conducting research to validate the model and also understand how it can be applied. And so now we would like to use this opportunity with all of you present in the same virtual room and hear also your experience, what is needed to make a job transition a reality. And to get you started, we have a few guiding questions. Firstly, looking from your perspective, we're interested to hear who do you work with, and do you think that this kind of tool would help your clients? And then from the perspective of your clients, what additional information or support would they need to make a career decision, and also to eventually get the job that they're applying for? And then also from the perspective of employers, what kind of reassurances would they potentially need? And finally, we're also really curious about where do you currently get your labor market information? What kind of tools or sources of information do you use? So yeah, I'll let Jenna to facilitate.
Yeah, so if anyone has any, would like to volunteer any answers to any of these, we'd love to hear. So please raise your hand on Zoom, and then we can unmute you and hear what you have to say. Otherwise, please feel free to keep writing in the chat.
Just to facilitate discussion, you can also go back to our example of hotel concierge and the two transitions to a customer experience manager or to social security officer. You can also comment on this example if you like. What we find often is that people kind of see that the transition to the social security officer might be a bit kind of how to say, it might be a big change, because when you're hotel concierge, you're kind of dealing with happy people that are going on vacation, whereas the mood and kind of the general sort of general setting is quite different when you have to lead clients in terms of social benefits and things like that. So this might be a feature that might be like a potential barrier for this transition.
I can see that we have a hand from Mark. So please go ahead.
Hi, yes, I'm sorry I'm not on video. I've got a problem with my video screen at the moment, but I'm just, what's intriguing me a little bit about this is the reassurances, the question about reassurances that employers would need. And so obviously the questions presuppose how you envisage this tool to be used. And I just wonder if you're able to give us a little bit of insight into how you do envisage employers interacting with this kind of tool or being presented with it.
Who wants to take that?
I can have a first go. So at this point, what we're publishing tomorrow is just the methodology behind the tool, because it's completely novel. And the next point then in the process is to validate the transitions that the tool recommends, or that not so much the tool, I guess the algorithm recommends. And we have a process of kind of qualitative and quantitative validation planned, and that continues for several months. So we're not planning to release the algorithm until late January of next year. And then what we hope to do is partner with a number of kind of intermediaries, kind of careers advice services, and perhaps even some large employers to very kind of carefully and slowly kind of trial the algorithm in different kind of use cases. So the one that you described, kind of helping employers, would be one of those use cases, but it's certainly not something that we just plan to kind of launch as a kind of standalone website. We really want to validate the transitions first, and then to trial like what is the best way of kind of communicating this information to the various user groups. So with a large employer, it might be something like helping to improve the functioning of their internal labour market. We know that, say like with the large consultancies, they have the problem of having teams all around the world and needing to form teams at kind of short notice and people with very different skill sets. So, can the tool help to kind of identify workers who may have the right skills and things like that? But I think that's probably going to take us most of next year in reality to kind of trial those different use cases, and I suspect iterate on the algorithm itself. Hopefully, does that answer your question, Mark? Oh.
Great, and I can also see a comment from Amanda, which is that she can't get her hand raising to work, but she works for a large employer where it would be very useful. So that's great to hear.
That's really nice.
In the chat, which
hi, I've unmuted now. Thank you. I work for a really large employer across the UK and across the world. Really, we're in 90 different countries, and one of the things that happens to us fairly regularly, that if we lose a contract or for some economic downturn, part of a sector disappears, such as sport and leisure at the moment, it'd be really helpful for us to use something like this to look at where we need to target our internal skills-based training, where we've got gaps versus the skills that the individuals that we may end up losing have, and we could sort of use them rather than lose them and start again. And I'm not saying we do, it's as base as that, but I can see some real benefits, and particularly for individuals themselves looking at, well, actually, I'm interested in going into that sector. What skills do I need to have, and what do I already have that help me get to where I need to be? So I can see this as being really, really useful. And we're on the CARES framework, and we're working in partnership with Blue Arrow, one of the big recruitment companies that has something like this, but not as sophisticated as this.
It's really interesting to hear. It echoes too, Jenna, doesn't it, what you heard yesterday? We were speaking to another larger employer, and they were wanting to close down certain sections of their business, but were looking to transfer the staff internally, and just wanted some ideas, really. So the idea, from the algorithm as to where they might be able to kind of move staff, what other skills what other positions where their skills would be kind of transferable to. So that's potentially another question that it might help to answer. But yeah, thank you for that feedback. That's really nice.
Yeah.
There's another quick question in the chat. I think we have time for one more before we sort of move on and speak about the next parts and the functionalities of the algorithm. But there's a question about the algorithm and personality from a job advert.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. So it's very much not sophisticated enough to kind of sense the personality type of every individual. So the algorithm is based on the job that you currently do, and it makes assumptions about, well, given you're in that job, here are the skills and the work experiences and the work activities that we think you're used to and the skills that you have, etc. There are other tools out there already that various quizzes and things that sense your personality type. I guess the point I made in the chat is that by taking account of the work activities in your current job, it may get a sense of your personality type. So some of the, Carlos, you can correct me, but I think some of the work activities include things like sitting for long periods, working outside, talking face to face with people. So if you're in a job that involves those activities, then it may capture your underlying personality type, and then it will match you to jobs that involve those very similar work activities to those. But so my point is that no, not explicitly, it doesn't take account of your personality type, but I think indirectly it may capture kind of aspects of it based on your current job.
Great, thanks, Kath. And then I think there was another question just a bit earlier, which was, is the system live now? Do you want to very briefly explain kind of what's live, what's coming out tomorrow in terms of the data viz and the map, and then we can hand over to Carla.
Sure. So what's coming out tomorrow is the labour market map, and so the map itself just shows you the similarities between occupations, but it's more just a kind of a visual aid to give people a sense of what we mean by kind of mapping the similarities between occupations. And then what we'll also publish tomorrow is a data visualization that walks through one example of a shop assistant and identifies their viable transitions, and then says, well, but what if they also are concerned about automation risk or exposure to COVID, and kind of just plays through some like different kind of transition options that they may wish to consider. But then, like I said, we're going through this validation process, so we didn't want to release kind of every transition at this point, because we want to kind of have more confidence in them first. And so that process continues for the next few months, and then at the end of January next year, we'll publish the algorithm itself. And then also Gina, is it in March that we published the user guides? More kind of digestible, kind of easy to read guides with some of the insights from the research.
Exactly, so we'll be publishing, I'll touch on this again at the end, but we'll be publishing 3 user guides, one which will be targeted at public and private employment services, one that will be targeted at employers, and the third which will be targeted at policymakers and researchers. And they'll be very short, kind of 3 to 5 page long guides, which will explain practically how each of those 3 audiences might make use of the algorithm, and also the broader insights from the project as well. I think if it's okay, we'll just pass back over to Carlos to cover the last couple of slides about the model itself, and kind of my favorite part of it, which is the sort of upskilling elements.
Thanks, Jenna. Yeah, thank you everybody for your insights and comments. And now that we have discussed the existing viable and desirable options for hotel concierge, we may also want to look into how can we expand the range of possible transition opportunities for at-risk workers such as Alex. And to do this, we examined which skills might be the most effective for upskilling to create new transition opportunities. And so we did something we call simulating the impact of upskilling by selecting a skill from this European skills framework, and we added it to the worker's skill set. In this example, we add the skill to manage staff to hotel concierge, and then we re-evaluated the similarities of this occupation to all the other occupations and checked if any new safe, viable, and desirable transitions emerged. And in this example, we see that, kind of not surprisingly, most of the new transitions are related to managerial roles. And this is actually, in fact, the most effective skill that we tested for hotel concierge. And so what we did is we evaluated the effectiveness of this skill and several other, so we pre-selected 100 potential skills that we thought would be perhaps the most promising for increasing the range of worker options. And we tested them across all high-risk occupations. And then what emerged was kind of 3 main groups of skills, which were the most effective at opening up new transition pathways. And I think it's like not really surprising that the 3 main groups are related to management, communication, as well as sort of more sophisticated forms of information analysis and evaluation. So for example, we have skills like manage staff or budgets or manage projects. And then for communication, we have skills that use different communication channels or liaise with managers and authorities, also to build and maintain business relationships. And then in the 3rd category, we have skills about executing feasibility studies or assessing financial viability or analyzing risk and performing research. And overall, these skills unlocked 2 to 3 new transitions on average, but this could vary a lot based on the particular occupation in question. And so what is nice is that our algorithm actually allows you to check, for each occupation or groups of occupations, what kind of skills are the most effective. For example, we found that management skills were slightly more effective for sales and services roles compared to like arts and media roles. And so, but this tells us that, we shouldn't use like one size fits all upskilling programs for all workers, but we really now we have kind of the tools to start tailoring the upskilling and reskilling programs to get, the best outcomes for each worker. And then a final point also about about this tailoring guidance is that we can kind of go and do a deeper dive into the skills gap analysis. And here I'm showing you an example of a specific transition going from a shop assistant to a visual merchandiser. So visual merchandiser is responsible for the visual display of goods in a retail shop. And so what we have here is on the first column on the left, we have the skill set of the shop assistant. And I'm showing you the skills that we could match to the skill set of the visual merchandiser. So the visual merchandiser skills are in the second column on the right. And I have highlighted with green the skills that are perfectly matching between both occupations. So you see things like maintaining relationships with suppliers or customers. And then in yellow, we have what we call partial matches, where we have compared the skills using natural language processing. And we have found sort of matches that are not perfectly overlapping, but there is some kind of similarity. And for example, I can highlight the skill to supervise merchandise displays versus the skill to coach team and visual merchandising. So they both involve this aspect of merchandising. And then another pair, which I like, is to identify customers' needs and the skill to liaise with appropriate staff for visual display. And so there's both skills involve some form of communication and understanding the needs, but from different kind of audiences. And finally, you can also see in red the skills that we kind of call the potential skill gaps. And what is also nice is that we can use kind of our algorithm to rank these skills. So at the top, we have the best matches, and the bottom, we have the worst ones, or basically the skills that might be the least familiar to the shop assistant. And you can find at the bottom of the list really skills that are specific to this visual merchandiser occupation, like to interpret floor plans or to conduct research and trends in design, or to execute visual presentation changes. And so we hope that this kind of tool perhaps would be really useful for you, to interrogate sort of like different skill sets and to kind of quickly see, where might be the largest skill gaps, and also which might be the transferable skills, which is quite important because that we have seen in sort of other research also that workers quite often struggle to actually articulate the transferable skills and the skills that they, especially I think the partial matches, like the skills that you really could kind of try and take over to your future job. And also employers actually struggle to recognize the transferable skills for workers that come from different sectors. And so I think this also a bit relates to the question in the chat, which was about a worker who might want to go from driving delivery cars to becoming I think what was it, like beautician or beauty assistant. So you can take these two occupations and you can quickly look at the possible overlaps of skills and also the main skill gaps using this kind of tool. This is kind of this is where I'm kind of closing. This is the closing part of my presentation. I'll just give you a quick teaser of some of the other key findings that we will publish tomorrow in the report. So we showed you that while you can measure the automation risk, we can also go one step further and we can identify the precise features that actually contribute to the automation risk. And so we have identified work activities that kind of increase the risk, such as to interact with computers or to do one-way routine interactions with people. And then we have also identified activities that decrease the risk, such as non-routine engagements with the public or resolving conflicts and negotiating or knowledge building. And then importantly, we can also identify the most common bottlenecks of automation. So this is quite interesting because in principle, you could try to use the bottleneck tasks to protect workers from automation. So you could try to rebundle perhaps the the tasks to create job profiles which are sort of less likely to be automated by machine learning algorithms. But and also you can use this information to actually see where the next which advances in machine learning or also robotics, like which advances in these fields would be actually the most disruptive for the labor market. And then to wrap this up, so we kind of have built, in a sense, a map of occupations that can help to identify potential pathways from high risk to safer occupations. And on the right-hand side, you can see a visualization of such a map. So each dot here is an occupation, and their placement in the map depends on their similarity to other occupations in terms of the skills, activities, and work context. And we have overlaid on top of this map with the color the automation risk, with red being high risk and blue being low risk. And so you can appreciate from this map that automation risk concentrates in clusters in this occupational landscape. And this kind of gives us a warning that that it will be quite, if you find yourself in this red cluster, you have to make potentially quite a large leap to a safer area. And then also the range of your options will vary widely depending on where exactly you find yourself in this map. So all of this and much more will be published in the report. But before we proceed with the Q&A, I will also give a word to Jenna to explain a bit more about the specific next steps of the project.
Great, thanks so much, Carlos. So as we kind of said until now, what we're doing at the moment after we publish our report and before we publish the algorithm in January is that we're speaking to as many stakeholders as possible, specifically job coaches, employers, policymakers, training providers, and anyone else who's working in this space, to check kind of what else we can do to improve the model, to validate the transitions, and so on. And then in January, as we said, we'll be publishing the algorithm, and then in March we'll be publishing these 3 practical user guides for the 3 audiences that I suggested before. So our kind of closing question to you is on the next slide, which is essentially what would be most useful for you to have in this user guide if you were going to pick it up and use it or apply it to your work or working with your clients. What would you like to see in this user guide? So if you have any kind of thoughts or responses for us on that question, we'd love to hear. Equally, if you have any kind of final questions that you want to ask about the tool or the model itself, we'd be really happy to answer. Also on a final note, just thank you so much for your attention and your time and for joining us this afternoon. It was really fun to present the model to you. And we will share the report, the link to the report, and also to the data visualization, which has this map and the example of the shop assistant in it with Helen at the end of the session, so she can email that round to you all tomorrow once it's published. So if anyone has any kind of final questions or has any final thoughts, please do either take yourself off mute or raise your hand, and we'd love to hear. Or Kath or Carlos, if you want to come back on any of the questions that we've missed in the chat, then do feel free as well.
Hi, Jenna. We have a comment here from Kathy who says screenshots with instructions are often easier to follow for individuals with lower digital skills or confidence using IT.
That's a really interesting point. So we won't be building the tools ourselves. That we'll be kind of hoping to incorporate our algorithm within the existing tools that are available. But what I would be really interested to hear is what websites or tools out there do you think are the ones that we should partner with? That really do offer an accessible experience to others, particularly people with lower digital skills. That would be, we'd like to trial kind of the insights from our algorithm in a kind of range of different environments. So that would be really interesting to hear kind of what are the best tools out there that are really accessible. That's
a really interesting point. And what we can do for you there, Kath, is when we send the link out for the recording to everyone. If there's any questions like that specifically that would be helpful for you, I can make sure we include that in the communication along with your contact details, because sometimes at the end of these sessions it's hard to think of the questions to ask straight away. So if everyone's anything like me, as soon as we press end, they'll think of an example they might use. So we'll make sure we include that. Will we be able to include a link to the report?
Yep, absolutely. So the report is going live tonight at midnight. So as long as you
so
send
what
an
I
email
will
tomorrow.
do then is I will hold off sending the link out this afternoon, and I'll send it to everyone tomorrow, so we can include all of it in the email, and we can publish everything at the same time to everyone.
Yeah, that would be perfect.
And then everyone's very welcome to get in touch afterwards if kind of questions come to mind over the next few days.
Mm-hmm. And on the point,
David said he'd be interested in the validity and replicability of results when the system is running.
That's really important, replicability to us, and that's why we're publishing the code in January. We really want our methodology to be open, and then for others to be able to see it and kind of comment on it. And the validity, that's also important. That's why we're taking these 3 months to kind of perform that validation check, and why we're using that mix of kind of qualitative types of validation, but then also quantitative as well. We've got quite a novel approach where we're using crowdsourcing to validate, because as you can imagine, there are tens of thousands of different transitions to kind of validate, and so we're using quite a novel approach there to try and get a sense of the quality of the transition recommendations.
Okay, so I can see that Deborah has a hand raised. Deborah, you should be able to unmute yourself because I've changed the settings. So see if you can, and if you can't, I will come and unmute you.
Okay, can you hear me then?
We can.
Okay. Can I just ask, there's lots, I can see that there's good potential for this, but I can also see there's it's touching on a lot of other things that are out there in the marketplace. Can I ask what you've done to go and look at things that you think it would fit into, rather than us telling you where we think the algorithm would fit? Because one of the things I'm now getting is application overload, and I'm tripping over people who've got some crackingly good ideas, but I can see that some of them are actually fighting against each other. Some of them have got the potential to be inside one another or linked to each other. And one of the issues my customers have, the ones that struggle with IT, is actually the ability to have any kind of broadband width. So you'd need, if I was using this with a customer, I would look to limit the amount of data on the screen to get them an introduction. And then when I'm working with them, or someone was working with them, you could then be using your systems to work with the customer. So almost like an introductory application that they could use to get them comfortable with these kinds of applications, and then move them on to something that's more in-depth, searching, links to other areas. I don't know what you thought about a kind of baby feeder application that works with some of the other applications out there.
Yeah, it's such a good point about application overload, because that's something we've noticed too. And that's why we don't want to design our own tool and have it on a kind of standalone website, because we just don't think people will go to it, and we don't have those those front-end skills that you need to really develop to make a really accessible tool. And there are just so many others out there that we think we're much better off focusing on improving the information that they can incorporate within their tools, the existing tools available, rather than kind of adding to that kind of application overload. Someone there in the chat mentioned LMI for All, and that's I think probably the organisation who we're closest to in terms of what we're offering, kind of improved labour market information, but not that kind of front end, if you like. So LMI for All offers, as I'm sure you know, a series of APIs that people can call on. So in terms of who we've looked at, so we're conducting about 40 interviews, is that right, Jenna? I may have the number slightly wrong, with organisations like yourselves and others, so potential user groups at the moment. Jenna, do you want to describe a bit more about who we've talked to so far?
Yeah, so we've spoken to, we're focusing our efforts largely on the UK, but the project does span kind of across Italy, France and Germany as well. So we've been speaking to different different people from across the 4 groups that we spoke about before. So policymakers and researchers, public and private employment services and employers, and then career advisors like yourselves across these 4 countries. So, and that ranges from kind of people that do it on sort of much smaller organizations all the way up to like very large scale employers. And we've also been speaking to some local governments and like government linked career services as well. I think, sorry, there's a couple.
Okay, so we've had a couple of suggestions and I'm really sorry, we've run out of time. So thank you for everyone who has made comments, but we have had comments from Mark who says, how about Adzuna and the job match service, run for Job Centre Plus, find a job. And Peter has said, will you consider developing an API rather than a specific front end tool? So
I can answer them very quickly. So Adzuna, we're talking to, we know them very well. And an API, yes, I think that's a really good like long-term aim. Once we've done validation and we have kind of users and we've kind of met that minimum viable product.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you to all 3 of you. Thank you to Jenna, Carlos, Kath. And I'm really sorry to have to stop us there because we were all in lots of suggestions and questions coming through. As Jenna has just said in the chat, please do keep in touch. I will be sending out the report link and everything with the link to the recording tomorrow, as we've discussed. So that will come out to you all, and I'll make sure the contact details for Kath, Carlos and Jenna are in there. Thank you all for spending your lunchtime with us as ever. I did promise in the chat briefly that I would fill everybody in on what we've got between now and 2021. I cannot believe we're that close to the end of the year already that I can give out a schedule that covers all of that. But just to let you all know, as I mentioned earlier, next week, we have Whitecalm joining us to look at improving our health and well-being when we're sat at a desk. What can we do to keep active, to keep fit and healthy, both physically and mentally? So get your gym kits on, because we've got a personal trainer and I know they're going to put us through our paces. So join us for that. The following week, we have some research from Dr. Jo Ingold and our colleague Teresa Scott, and both fellows of the IEP will be presenting around collaboration is key, but isn't there more to it than just working together. On the 16th of December, we will have our corporate partners at Society Matters joining us to look at universal credit and to think about some of the information and impact we need to be aware of when we're working with customers. And then on the 23rd of December, we are changing the way we do things. We are going to have a Christmas party. I'm going to be completely honest with you all. I don't know exactly how it's going to look yet, but I want to invite you all along. Bring some mince pies, some tea, or whatever tipple you want. And we're going to have more of a social session where we come together and yeah, celebrate Christmas in the virtual world, which it looks like most of us will be doing all around. And then on the 30th, we are going to have 1 week's break before we go into the 2021 series. So that's what we've got coming up over the coming weeks. Thank you again to Nesta for joining us today for what's been a really fascinating presentation. I look forward to reading the report myself tomorrow, and I look forward to seeing you all on future sessions. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.